Hello, Endeavor here. So tonight I'm with another guest, and we're going to be discussing how the West got to where it is today. Because I mean, anyone who's been watching the news for the last month or so sees that we're in a state of chaos right now. But I think anyone who's really been tuned into these events over the last couple of years knows that this is nothing new. It's something that's been in the making for a very long time. And we're going to be discussing kind of how, what was the process that led us down this road. And it's a question that's been on my mind for the last several years. And it's something that my guest has talked about a lot on his channel, specifically as it attains to World War II. So I'm here with Horus tonight. How are you doing, Horus?
I'm sorry, stuck on mute. Hello. Yeah, good to talk to you, Endeavour. Finally, I've been in a couple of mutual groups on Telegram and so on, but I think this is the first time we've chatted man to man, isn't it? So yeah, thanks for having me on. And yeah, I'm doing all right. I had a lovely dinner, and sorry, I don't know if you ever listened to European Freedom with me and Simon.
I did.
Yeah.
I only got into it a couple months ago, but it's a shame that. Oh, that was so sad of hearing of Simon's untimely death. But you guys did some great content on that channel.
I'm sure you would have been one of our guests, but we didn't get to it. But I mean, I love that guy. He was a sound fellow. But the reason I mentioned that was just because almost every week he would ask me how you doing, and I'd start talking about what I had for dinner. It just reminded me of that. But yeah, so it's the thing that's always on my mind about 7 o'clock because we've eaten and I go out for a bit of a walk. But yeah, essentially my answer is I'm fine because I've got a full belly. So yeah, how are you doing?
Not bad. I guess what do you talk about on your channel, and I guess what's your main theories on how the West got to where it is today?
Well, yeah. So this is why I suggested we do this. Like that, I mean, the first things that I watched on your channel were your Lies of the Enlightenment series, and it prompted me to think because on my channel last autumn started doing a series. The first video was called "The Infolding of the Right." I heard you mention that on another stream actually with Jackson, I think, a few months ago.
Yes.
And that video was in response to the sort of habitual practice of people referring to Antifa as the real fascists, which is I'm sure we agree is ridiculous. And I thought that it's not just daft; it's actually quite significant that people do that. It demonstrates that everyone, not only on the left, but most of the right as well, or what passes for the right, feels compelled to treat the far right or the nationalist or racialist right as the ultimate evil that everyone else has to unite against. And I thought, this is not just, a bit messed up. This is a serious problem. We need, I don't know if we need a proper left, but we definitely need a proper right. And it has to fight the left, and it can't be fighting itself. It can't be sort of, as I said, infolded. It can't be turned in against itself conceptually and in its understanding of history. I blamed that strange outcome that we're living with on the way that the Second World War turned out. And so then I made a series of, I think, 5 or 6 other videos which laid out a partial revisionist case for how that war came about, how it shouldn't have come about, how it's a disaster that it did come about. And I was more talking about how it was caused rather than the lasting, I was obviously talking about partly the lasting effects of it as well. But I was especially focusing on the early or the years before the war and the early part of the war. The reason I suggested we discuss this is because I'm aware that I've not thought a great deal about, I've blamed the Second World War for the distorted situation we're in today, where the right does not, the phony right, I call it, the right does not do its job, does not stand up against the left, doesn't fight for anything. And I blame that a great deal on the Second World War. However, I'm aware that I'm not that not that clear about what was already wrong beforehand, because I'm sure the world was not perfect beforehand. The right was not perfect. If it had been, obviously it wouldn't have produced that war. I mean, it was in Britain a Tory war. Labour backed it as well, but it was the Tories that caused it. So yeah, so I mean, the reason that made me think of you was because, of course, you are. Tell me if I'm wrong, but you're an anti-Enlightenment.
Yes.
So, so that's obviously part of the answer of what was wrong beforehand. Would you say?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, would you like to go into the war first, or do you want to go into the Enlightenment?
Start with the Enlightenment, I think.
Okay, so I was kind of the opinion maybe about a year or two ago that was kind of like the one event that sent us on the West on the route that on the path to where it is now. I've kind of shifted that a bit in that I've also questioned like how much does ideology actually matter in comparison to modernity? So how much of it is the result of technology? Because someone like Edward Dutton, for example, he blames a lot of that, a lot of what's going on now on genetics. He blames a lot of it on kind of what he calls the spiteful mutant. So that there's kind of this that after the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people survived who would have died off in the past, and that's made the West weaker. And that a lot of the people are genetically weaker, and that they don't have the same in-group preference, which is helpful to survival. But I think that the Enlightenment, what I've really been focusing on in that series, it's more about how these ideas affect present discourse. So not exactly, what did John Locke think? What did Rousseau think? It's more how these concepts have been brought into our political discourse and how they affect it today. So that's the main focus of the series. But in terms of like on a historical basis, I'd say that what Oswald Spengler says is, and forgive me, I actually haven't gotten around to reading Decline and Fall of the West yet, but I am relatively aware of his ideas. And I read Sir John Bagot Glubb, who has very similar ideas. That what he said was that civilizations eventually, what he calls them cultures, start off as being very spiritual and very confident, and that they have a lot of energy behind them. And what he called the Faustian culture, and I'm not as versed on this as someone like Morgoth may be, but what he pointed out is that they start off as very spiritual, very confident, and they enter a phase when they've kind of reached their pinnacle that they become self-critical, and excuse me, and I think that what Spengler identified the turning point as the French Revolution, but he says that he said he doesn't like to think of history in a cause and effect manner, but he thinks of it more in a process, and that certain events play a part in that process. And he's argued that modernity is something that has happened in plenty of civilizations. Sir John Bagot Glubb makes a lot of the same arguments. I'd say that the problem with the Enlightenment on a historical basis is that it was kind of when the West started to self-doubt itself. So, if you take the example of a Templar going off to the Crusades in the 12th century AD, he believed that he was on a mission for God. He believed that his cause was absolute good and was going to give him eternal salvation and bring eternal damnation to his enemies. So having that kind of civilizational confidence that the West would have had before the Enlightenment, the people that ruled it were absolutely convinced they were on the side of good. Someone like Louis XIV was convinced that he was anointed by God to be a ruler and that his reign was just for that reason. And the Enlightenment, it brings in a lot of narratives, which, one of the problems, first of all, it tries to rationalize a lot of this stuff. So, you can point to someone like Richard Dawkins today would point to the Crusaders and just say that they're religious fanatics just brainwashed by the church to go off and murder people. And then, what he'll say is that they were irrational. But the fact of the matter is that mindset, that spiritual, confident mindset is much more healthy for a civilization than this kind of rational post-Enlightenment one. Because what you see with people like Dawkins and Pinker, even though, he's part of the tribe, he's kind of subversive. and a lot of these Enlightenment liberals, Jordan Peterson, they try to look at the world in this rational way. And it's so easy to just deconstruct your civilization and to deconstruct the very foundations that made it confident to begin with, and that motivated your people to go off and create things. It's so easy to deconstruct that through this kind of rational mindset. And I'd say that was the first problem with the Enlightenment. And secondly, that I think a lot of things like guilt that we see today, it's created by a lot of these narratives, because like the first video I did in the series was on the idea of enlightenment itself. So the idea that we've ever even become enlightened as a human species, that we can just advance beyond our primal nature as these kind of savage, brutal creatures who are capable of just horrific violence. The idea that we can just advance beyond that, I think, is dangerous for a few reasons. One, it makes you look back at the past and with guilt, but secondly, it kind of makes you naive to a lot of the threats that you could face in the future. So, like the white liberal today, you or I might try to explain to them that what's going on today is going to be used to justify violence against them in the future. But they have this different view of humanity. They don't view humans as this savage creature. They view them as, they think that we've kind of advanced beyond that, and they can't conceptualize that ever happening. So I'd say that that's kind of the major problem with the Enlightenment. It's that it made the West self-doubt itself and rationalize a lot of the things that sustained it, a lot of the spiritual things that sustained it and brought it to its brought it up on the ascension. So what would you say about that? Do you
and about the last thing, and somewhat turn against nature as well, right? I mean, to try and elevate ourselves above the animals, with like that's sort of what you were saying,
yeah.
Right? Like, yeah, because I remember when I was at university, I had a friend studying biology. I was sitting up late talking to him one night, and he said, I said to him, "So what is it that actually separates man from all the other animals?" And he said, "Well, no one's been able to put, to identify any one particular thing." I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's what he said at the time. And I thought that was striking. I was like, "Oh, right. So does that mean?" But I didn't really accept it, because I just thought, well, there is something, but he just can't name what it is. But now, I think at some point since then, it's quite a long time ago now, I realised, no, we're not really that different, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's no need to want to be greater than the animals. To actually accept our bestialness is fine. I mean, while at the same time aspiring to be good and creative, or productive and peaceful. I think like those two things don't actually contradict. I mean, to acknowledge yourself as an animal, but an animal that has the capacity to think of better things and reach for them, that's quite natural. Like that's good. That's fine. That's human. And so I sense that when you mentioned about the Enlightenment, it made me think of people who, they want to imagine us to be something greater than we are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Now, I myself probably wouldn't say that humanity is akin to animals, even though I acknowledge we are a mammalian species. Because I mean, I myself am a Christian. I do believe that humanity kind of does have a higher status. But even under the Christian understanding of the world, it understands man as a creature that's able to inflict just the most horrific crimes against each other, and even against God in the Bible. They view man as a sinful creature. And the problem with liberalism and the Enlightenment is that it changed the perception of man to being this inherently good creature, and that it's the institutions around him that cause him to be bad. So, I mean, I don't reject everything from the Enlightenment, because there's different speakers who said different things. My favorite guy from the Enlightenment is Thomas Hobbes. And I understand that he's kind of one of the fathers of liberalism. So I don't agree with everything he said, but the one thing I absolutely agree with him on is just his view of man as just this savage creature man in nature is just capable of being absolutely ruthless, and life is just brutal and short, and that he needs order. So like what Hobbes called for was absolute monarchy, as the social contract, that the absolute monarch would uphold order, and in return he would provide people with with their rights to life, liberty, and property. And I mean, that's where Hobbes kind of is one of the first liberals, is that he recognized a rights-based system. But someone like Rousseau, for example, he believed that what was wrong with man was the institutions that were created around him. That in nature he was this kind of this like noble savage. He's famous for saying that man was born in chains. Or sorry, a man was born free, but everywhere he's in chains. And it's this kind of idea that that the imperfections in society or imperfections in man are the result of a failure of institution rather than something that's inherent in human nature. I think that's one of the major that's one of the major problems that came out of the Enlightenment. And I think a lot of these, the reason I wanted to do this series is that they affect the discourse today. So a lot of people on the left will say that the reason that Black Lives Matter is rioting in the street is because of institutional racism, that they've that we just haven't bought them a ping pong table at their youth center. And you see, it's something that's wrong with the institutions. It can't be that. It can't be something innate in human nature that's causing these differences to come about. So I'd say that that's. In my series, I go over a bunch of these. So I'd say a lot of just bad ideas, and generally just a bad conception of human society and of man came from the Enlightenment.
Yeah. Yes, it's fascinating. When that quote by Rousseau, I just think of that as the most dangerously wishful way of seeing the world possible. That is there's a kind of evil that can only be done by people who think of themselves as enlightened or think of themselves as compassionate beyond reproach. Do you know what I mean? Like people who believe themselves to have already reached a moral state. And that whatever they do is not necessarily justified, but all being done for love and therefore beyond reproach. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, what I observed with the modern liberal is that they tie up ideology with morality. So someone like Antifa, I'm sure that you've talked about this in some of your videos, that the idea that they're against fascism, that makes them a morally just person, and then their actions are justified in that they're against fascism because fascism is the ultimate evil. And when they say fascism, what they really mean is just white people. They're just so convinced that they're morally good because they hold the correct ideology. And that's how you get things like what happened to the Covington Catholic children. Were you aware of that from last year? Yeah. Things like the Covington Catholic case. That's how you get. Just look at what Antifa's and Black Lives Matter are doing right now. It's this what they've kind of done is they've tied up ideology with morality, and they're just so convinced that they're on the side of good that all their actions are justified. And I'd say it was the same with communism in the previous century.
Yeah, the sort of deliberate transgressing of all distinctions is one of the most disturbing, and it seems to me, I don't know if mad is the right word, but yeah, like anti-rational and anti-sane things about the left. Like you should not be logical to the like if logic doesn't justify, it doesn't bring you to anti-racism, or things like that. Or you shouldn't. I mean, Ludwig von Mises. This is something we might disagree about. I like Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard. I like the Austrian school, but the Mises wrote a good essay once on polylogism. I think polylogism, like as in the idea that there's different logics for different identities. that to me is just bonkers. I've been through all sorts of evolutions in my thinking in my life, like over time, things that completely contradict each other. But one thing I've never ever been against is logic. I've always thought, like, it's by no means the whole of our thinking. It's by no means all that you need, but it is objective. And when people try and go against logic, I'm kind of bamboozled. I'm like, that is kind of what led me to race realism as well, because I realized that some people don't want to be logical, and it does seem like more something that our people want by and large. I mean, not all of us, but it's something that we value, and I do really think that not everyone around the world does.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because here's another problem with the Enlightenment is that it views man as this rational creature who will formulate his conception of the world based on the science. So you'll read a bunch of papers, find out what's the truth, formulate your view of the world based on the truth, and then select the politician who is most in line with what you've discerned as being true. And that's how people are going to come to their conclusions. That's not how it works at all. People are really more they're really more controlled in a religious manner. That sorry, one second. Sorry. Okay, so people are more prone to thinking religiously, in that they're controlled by symbols. So and I think this is true for the right as well, not only the left. So like I mentioned earlier, the Templar in the Crusades. He wasn't thinking rationally. He was thinking religiously, that he had a conception of God, of the Christian God, as a metaphysical good, and that working towards that was serving a greater good. Where, in the same way that a liberal today views anti-racism, egalitarianism, which I think both you and I realize that really just means being anti-white. That they view that as kind of this metaphysical good, and that will supersede rationality. So one thing that liberalism prides itself on is science and only the facts, and that we're going to analyze things and discuss them in the marketplace of ideas. But that really doesn't work. And you can take the example of race realism. We have all of this evidence in the world to suggest that there's disparities between different racial groups. We have plenty of studies. We have all these statistics. I mean, you go on, just watch either Alt-Hype or Sean Last's channel, and they go quite in depth on how much evidence we really do have for this. Yet all the policy we have today is based on the idea that humans are completely equal. Now, I think that there's two aspects to that. There's one is that it's been designed that way as intentionally to be destructive. And I think, you and I both have an idea of who is largely pushing that. But then secondly, with a lot of liberals, people that, they'll like the Facebook page, I fucking love science. You know that page. Do you?
Yep.
Oh, God. I love this tweet that I saw on Twitter a few months ago. They said that liberals fucking love science as long as it stays within Care Bear's understanding of human nature. Yeah. So, the second you can show them all this research in the world, and they'll reject it because they hold egalitarianism to be this metaphysical good. So science goes out the window as soon as it contradicts the ideology.
Yeah. There's loads of things that you said. My head's in a bit of a spin because there's so many things there's so many cross-cutting aspects to it. I mean, pretty much everything you've said so far, the tribal question rings out again and again and again, because left-wing white people, I think, adopt anti-racism very sincerely, but most of the movements and most of the academics that have propagated those ideas have not come from white people; they've come from the tribe, right? So it's people being, unfortunately, used. I mean, to some extent, it's not that they're not to blame, but they're being used. Their good nature is being used against their group, and that's the case with loads of things. I mean, BLM included. There was something you said further back that I forgot, and it was really interesting.
Was it that liberalism prides itself on rationality, but it doesn't live by that?
Yeah. Okay. This is something we might disagree on.
Okay.
Because I've been listening to people like Morgoth, Keith Woods, Richard Spencer. I don't know about Keith, but the other two, they're both Spenglerians. These guys are all sort of fairly statist. I wonder if I'm in a different strain of thinking. I'm well prepared for it to be challenged because I know there's limits to what I understand. But one thing that I've sort of alluded to, I don't know if I've said it directly in my videos about the Second World War, is that one thing I regret is that the Second World War and the First World War, big time as well, were ruinous for liberalism. But liberalism was, something that I think was more or less good. However, it begs the question of, did liberalism allow the left to just do what it wanted and take over all the institutions, which I'm sure we agree that is the case now. They possess almost every institution, even under conservative governments, nominally conservative governments. And I would say, my answer is, right, so this is why I mentioned, say, Richard Spencer. He often says conservatism is a completely failed, I think it's his ideology. And it's like, well, I agree in the sense that, the people who call themselves conservatives are a major part of the ruin of the world over the last 70 years. Witness Donald Trump, witness David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson. They're all, I would just say they're traitors, right? I would say they're leftists in a lot of ways, just not economically. But I don't blame conservatism for that, and I don't blame liberalism for what happened. I think that people have adopted those names whilst being false, and I would say that the evil subversive elements that have come from the left and from other ethnic tribes with deliberate plans to subvert, that is what is to blame, and not fighting them is what is to blame. And so I don't blame this. Yeah, this is what I thought we might discuss. Really, that I don't blame liberalism itself. I actually quite like a lot about it. And so, in your series on the lies of the Enlightenment, you spoke about the marketplace of ideas. Now, I totally agree that that doesn't, it doesn't function. Like, if anyone says that's the way things actually function, they're wrong. But it is something that I like. Is that something that you dislike even in principle?
Well, yes, because I think that, like I mentioned earlier, people don't just look at the evidence on a rational basis. They don't just listen to. They kind of have. They're, like I mentioned earlier, they think more religiously, and
we
a
have
lot of times
subjective values and biological inclinations and so on. Yeah.
But I totally agree with that. The other problem with the marketplace of ideas is that it doesn't. My problem with liberalism is that one of my major problems is that it puts liberal rights above a foundation. So, for example, you're British, and you've talked a lot about British nationalism and how Britain has been subverted. If it was in place that the well-being of the British people and of the British nation was more important than liberal rights, then someone coming in and saying, that they're horrible, they're privileged, they've oppressed the rest of the world, and they need to take a bunch of migrants, that wouldn't be given nearly as much legitimacy, because it would be seen as an attack on the very foundation. But, liberalism kind of lets that in the door, because because it puts the liberal right of somebody to say that and to advance that, and more importantly, to create organizations which lobby for that. It gives them the ability to do that. And then when the tables turn, all they have to do is once they have the institutional strength, they can just shut you down. And then, you can make the claim that, well, they're censoring me. They're denying me the freedom of speech. I thought this was a liberal country, but when the person who is in control at that point, they can just throw those values out the window the second that is no longer convenient for them.
And so, and that's their intention all along. Yeah.
So my problem with the marketplace of ideas is that there needs to be. No, I don't think that. I think that there's a certain context that it could be okay. For instance, if I got myself, Academic Agent, and Keith Woods in a discussion about economics, I'm sure all three of us would disagree about something. And I'd be perfectly fine with our ideal society where myself, Keith Woods, and Academic Agent could disagree about economics. But I think there has to be certain foundations that have to be beyond. They have to be beyond reproach, and that this is what your society is designed to defend, and therefore things that are against that shouldn't be allowed. So like I made the argument in my previous video that, you know, someone creating an organization that advances like critical race theory should be banned in a European country, because the country should be run for the benefit of its native population. And this is something that is undisputably bad for them. So there's no reason for it to be tolerated.
It is pure evil, pure hostility. Yeah. I don't know if whether we differ on how that should be dealt with, but I mean, because this makes me wonder: am I a liberal or what? I mean, I would typically call myself a libertarian, but I don't mean the same by it that a lot of others do. It's funny if you're in libertarian groups here and there, like on Facebook and stuff, you find quite a range. Like there are people who are you would call them something closer to fascists. There is a crossover, big time.
Oh, there's the pipeline,
and it's absolutely real, and it's still flowing as well. But there's also people at the other end who are they just might as well be leftists, the low T buffoons. But it makes it because I mean, I often wonder, like, say if I just became Prime Minister tomorrow, or Home Secretary or something, I would, one way or another, just ensure that all these subversive organisations were closed, and all the people who have participated in them who weren't ethnic British, I would just deport them all. And I wouldn't, I do think it's important to do it by the right means so as to leave a good precedent, because, like in the sense of legal precedents are important. For instance, I think it's good that we don't have retroactive lawmaking. You can't punish someone for something that wasn't a crime when they committed it. Things like that. On the other hand, I imagine that if I became Home Secretary tomorrow, I couldn't just let all these traitors get away with it. So this is kind of a contradiction for me. So maybe my liberalism is giving way. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe what I'm describing there isn't really liberalism anyway. It's sort of constitutional reservedness, I suppose. But I don't know where it is that I disagree or I differ from you there. I'm not sure. Because I want a similar sort of outcome. I want people... critical race theory is a perfect example of just arch hostility towards our people in our own land. It's just that should not be happening one way or another. But I like the idea, I guess, of a world where our people can have liberalism or freedom. I mean, freedom. Yeah. Okay. So what you said before was the mistake is putting liberal rights before good outcomes for the people. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, it's putting liberal rights, but beyond the foundation, which really should be your people, your culture, your heritage, and such. Yeah,
that there I do totally agree. Because I said this to someone else recently that with libertarianism, they have the non-aggression principle, and I think that's generally a good principle. But some of them think that being a libertarian, all it means is just holding that principle and just. It's ridiculous. It's as though their mind is just a desk and news stories arrive on it and they just apply the nap to it. Right? It's ludicrous way of existing. Right? You cannot do anything like that. I mean, you're nothing. You're just you're a computer. And the stupid thing about it is that they just don't care about outcomes. Right? They've completely foregone consequentialism. Whereas I've long thought, ever since I first heard of these distinctions between deontology, consequentialism, you can't just go with one, can you? I mean, the deontological stuff appeals to a part of me, but not at the expense of destroying or just allowing society to be destroyed. So would you say this liberals and libertarians, they make that's sort of their mistake? It's like almost pure deontology.
Yeah, about a month ago, I was locked in this argument with libertarians from Academic Agent server. Now, that's not a shot at Academic Agent. I think he's pretty much on our side, and he's based on pretty much all these issues. But there's a lot of holdover from his earlier videos.
Because he does care about the outcomes.
Yes, he does. And I actually, for example, I posted it that basically I just jail the people that are pushing drag queen story hour, and I actually had a libertarian say that it would be tyranny because that would be using the government to do that, and that the left would get revenge on us for banning it. And I thought, first of all, the left already is doing that, and secondly, having a society that this exists, in my opinion, is tyranny. It's something that just shouldn't exist.
And it's like, yeah, it's really perverted and stuff. I mean, yeah, I suppose maybe this is a bit of a side point, but just that thing that a whole range of people, libertarians, liberals, Tories, centre leftists as well, they all say that thing of, are you sure you want the government to have this power? Because that might, they say this to leftists about left-wing anti-free speech, left-wing deplatforming of us, like, or hate speech laws. They say to their my fellow leftists, like, are you sure you want the government to have that power? Because that could get turned back against you. But if I was on the far left, my answer to that would be, well, don't worry about it. Everything's going our way, so that's just not going to be a problem. I mean, they might be wrong. I mean, I like to think that they're wrong about that. But as it stands, they have nothing to worry about. I mean, it makes perfect sense for them to try and strangle us, right?
Oh yeah, because the left knows. One of the one libertarian argument that I despise the most is that banning things doesn't work. That's just completely wrong.
No.
The left knows damn well that if they want something crushed, they ban it. Like, that's what Antifa is for. Is to it's the last line of defense against our people with our ideas from entering the discourse. First, they try to they don't give you a platform. Then they go after your job, and then they threaten you with physical violence. So the left has quite effectively kept the outfolded right, as you might call it, out of the discourse for the last 75 years or so, at least for the last 60, because they know damn well that if they want an idea to stay out of the discourse, they must crush it with all of their might. Like, for example, race realism. That's, like I mentioned earlier, that's something we've known about since at least the 1980s. And what did they do? They basically ran Charles Murray out of academia. They I think there was even times when Arthur Jensen had to be like evacuated or something like that. Like, I can't remember exactly what
minor terrorism, low level terrorism.
They're threatening terrorism against him for his views. James Watson, who's like one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century, and he's like extremely old, and he said last year that he basically admitted that race realism was true. They took away his Nobel Prize. I mean,
right, yeah.
So they know
as well, isn't it?
Yeah, so they know that that's an idea that cannot get into the discourse, because then that takes the whole that yanks the card out, the bottom card out of the house of cards of anti-racism. Basically, all this stuff they're talking about of institutional racism, all the stuff about centuries of oppression, that's all complete bullshit if race realism is true. So they know damn well that they cannot allow that to enter the discourse. So, I mean, the left definitely knows that they need to use that using power works, really, and it has been effective, because what you see is that these ideas haven't been able to get into the discourse. One thing you mentioned earlier that I think I probably would like to reply to was that liberalism works. Liberalism worked before World War II, and we'll probably get onto the war.
Before the First World War, maybe.
Okay, before the First World War. Okay, and that I actually do agree with to a large extent. I do think that the West was not a crumbling. Well, was not a civilization in dire straits in 1914. I certainly don't think that's the case. I think that militarily, economically, it was probably at its strength at that point. Maybe not spiritually, but liberalism does work in the context of a homogenous European nation that's socially conservative. And that I totally agree with. But the
values of the people living in it already need to be good. Yeah.
Yes, you need to have those foundations there to begin with. Yeah. And one thing that Morgoth has pointed out on several occasions is that his theory is that it was Christianity was doing a lot of the heavy lifting for liberalism, and that it only really worked with that as the cultural foundation. Because, for example, if you don't have that religious the religious values in place, I mean, liberal arguments can be used to justify things like transgenderism. Maybe not for kids, but if you read someone like John Stuart Mill, his book On Liberty, I can't really think of any. I can't really think of any argument against transgenderism for adults that maybe not for children, but I can't really think of any good arguments against the LGBT agenda that he could put forth under that framework, because if it's all about individual liberty and not like collective societal health, then what is wrong about that? It's just people expressing their own individual liberty, really. So I think you need to have that. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, he used that very phrase. People should be able to conduct experiments in living, like in finding their own way of living happily as well. And you could totally count transgenderism as one of those. It's fascinating to imagine, though. I mean, there's no way we can do this, but just if you could just show him personally a picture or a bit of video footage of just like a tranny parade or something, and say, does this fall within, I mean, this is obviously not what you imagined, but are you happy with this, or does this all what you're thinking? Because I think of John Stuart Mill often, because I mean, when people say that mass immigration has resulted from liberalism, I think, is that what John Stuart Mill envisioned? I doubt it. I mean, it probably just would never have occurred to him. Well, maybe it would. I don't know. Maybe it would. But I imagine not. I imagine he meant this is how our people ought to live in a liberal way,
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, John Stuart Mill did say that liberalism is only for civilized people. So he said that, I mean, I don't know to what extent he was a race realist, but he did say that.
And sane people as well, right?
Yeah. Well, what he said was that people that are not civilized need to be under responsible despotism until they can become civilized. Now, we can argue, whether or not that is even possible to civilize the third world. I actually am pretty doubtful about that. But yeah, I think a lot of the arguments, though, that they were like, because a lot of these things that we see today were ushered in with liberal arguments, but blanking out a couple of the truths, because if the full truth was allowed to be told and it actually was a marketplace of ideas, we wouldn't have mass immigration because of the of things like race realism. But once you kind of just you just kind of block out that one truth, the liberal arguments for things like multiculturalism kind of do make sense, because if everyone really is just like a blank slate, like John Locke claimed that they are, and that they're just these individuals that you need to be given education and stuff, then it makes sense that it wouldn't matter. But of course, there's two aspects to that. There's one that there's just the falsehoods that's based on. But then secondly, I also think that it fails to understand several things that are immaterial of value. So like even if you can make the argument that, well, then are high IQ people, is it good to have immigration from places like China or India? Maybe on a small scale it could be, but would you want to import Hong Kong and recreate Hong Kong and Scotland or Ireland, because that's something that people have actually proposed.
Yep.
And if you're just going on the pure material, you could argue that you could actually make that argument it'd be good for the economy. But I think that the more pressing argument is that it's something immaterial that's being destroyed. And that's something that liberalism really doesn't have any answers for. So, can you even make a good argument through that framework on why I don't know, the British people or the German people not existing 100 years from now, why that's a bad thing if the economy is going to be so much better? It's very difficult to it's very difficult under that framework to justify why that's not a good thing. But I think just based on on human nature, it's very clearly a bad thing, because the people that live there clearly hold that as something that's very dear, their own peoplehood.
This makes me think of, I mean, I don't know how relevant this is, but have you ever read any of the Austrian school, any of the writings of the Austrian school?
No, I haven't.
I mentioned Mises and Rothbard earlier. I'm not talking about Hayek. I think Hayek was kind of, I don't know, the others didn't like him. He's not a good example of the Austrian school. But I don't know if it was, I don't know who was the first economist. We're sort of talking latter half, sort of late 19th century, the subjective theory of value came along. And that, I think, is a very, very important idea, without which any sort of liberal or Enlightenment thinking is going to be a disaster, because that's something that the Austrian school took on absolutely centrally. The idea that they're writing about economics, but they're not saying economics is everything. They're not saying that money or material is everything. They're saying that value, like, as evidenced by what we do, as evidenced by what we exchange for what, and so on, what we do with our time, what we do with our resources, value is intrinsically subjective. So you cannot tell someone that GDP rising is good for them. You can ask them what they think of it. Ultimately, they're going to tell you, one way or another, they're going to tell you what they think. When we saw this, I don't know how much you followed the debates about, well, before and after the referendum, but about leaving the EU. We were being informed, I was a hard leaver, we were being informed for years that we were wrong to want to leave the EU because it was going to harm the GDP, which I perfectly accepted it may well do. Like, it seems very likely that there will at least be some dip. It might grow more strongly afterwards, but it really wasn't the point. It was, I don't want to be in the EU. It was, and I'm not just talking about blind instincts or anything like that. I had thought about it. I did have reasons for it, but it's like, don't fucking tell me that it's all about whether the GDP goes up more or drops less or whatever. It's nothing to do with that. Like, well, that's one factor. You can't tell me what I care about, And that's the insight of the Austrian school really, really made central to their idea of economics. So I would say they're an example of like good liberals who are realistic about people's, I don't know if you call it irrationality or non-rationality, but they didn't prescribe to you, you should put economics above everything else. They just said, if you want to understand economics, this is the correct theory for doing so. But economics takes its place among the whole panoply of philosophy. And I think that makes it brilliant. It's not too ambitious. It doesn't say that studying economics and coming to the right conclusions about that reflects or illuminates the whole world. It just gives you the right theory about economics, as for as much or as little as that is worth. And
I'd say. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Just that insight is very important, I think.
Yeah, I definitely would agree that that's a criticism I've levied against someone like what was his name, Adam Smith, before that. I don't think that people, because according to his worldview, they're only going to they're going to be driven by what's economically viable for them, when I don't really think that's the case. Like, for example, there's my favorite town in Canada is called Charlottetown. It's this beautiful Victorian style, very historically important village with about 60,000 people on Prince Edward Island. If somebody told me that, it'd be good for the economy to level the town, build a couple of glass covered business centers, a Walmart, and a McDonald's there, and maybe a mosque and an LGBT pride parade, because you need the whole yeah, because it's going to bring more jobs and bring the whole global homo thing, and it's going to be the next Toronto or something like that. Like, I don't care. It's not about the money. Even if you're like unemployed and you're crying out for a job, it's still not going to be the only thing that matters. Yeah, exactly. That is definitely an innovation. That is something I would be able to bring up aboard, because I'm not huge into economics, but I'd say that my criticism of a lot of Austrian school economics would be that very thing. It's the not understanding that there are things that are valuable to people that aren't just numbers. And so I think that we should probably get onto is the other thing we wanted to discuss. It's that it was World War II or both the world wars, if you'd like to discuss both, because I watched your series. I'd say I agree with a large amount of it. So what is your real theory on how that was kind of a turning point to where we got today?
Well, you see that I started and ended the series by talking about how it affected the right. So yes. That's sort of the answer. It's that I was prompted to make it by how I believe the war affected the right, and not just the war. The idea of anti-fascism, which I would say started in, I mean, others might dispute this, but I would say started in 1919 in Italy. I don't know if you've seen what I said about this in one of my videos. Was that
the community defending yourself to death or something?
Yeah, that's my favorite of my videos. Actually, I'm most pleased with that one. But yeah,
what was the line exactly?
Well, just that I don't know if it was a single line, but just that what is called anti-fascism is just communism. Like it's not in every context, but communism was the aggressor, and fascism was a reaction against the march of communism. Right. That's why fascism arose with Mussolini. It was to stop the communist rampage across Italy in 1919, 1920. And it was successful pretty much. And I'll bring in the Austrian school again. Mises wrote at least one piece praising, well, relatively praising Mussolini, because the centrists were not doing anything. We're just allowing the communists to just ransack the country, just literally like, bands of thugs, like taking
kind of like today, kind of like what we're seeing right now.
Right. And no wonder more people now are turning to fascism or finding fascism attractive, or at least something they're prepared to discuss. No wonder. But yeah, I sort of lost my train of thought. But about the war, it made. I don't know if this is right. I don't know. This is the thing. I would like to hear criticisms of it, but it left because the Tories started the war. I mean, this only explains Britain. This is part of the limits of my argument, but it only explains it was the Tories' war, and the Tories, carried it through. They led the government. They incorporated Labour into the government, but they led the government all the way to the end. A very, very bitter, annihilating sort of end. They basically had to take ownership of the war. I didn't really say this in my videos, but I thought it was kind of implicit that they kind of morally took ownership of the war. Because, I mean, they wanted the people, by and large, to believe it was, if not glorious, at least wholly justified, right? So they were perfectly happy, more than happy, because they drove it really, but perfectly happy to go along with the idea that the war happened because of Hitler. Hitler had to be, defeat. Hitler was trying to take over the world, which is bollocks. But Hitler was trying to take over the world, so we had to stop him. So that's why the war happened, and therefore it was good and justified. And allying with the communists was just something we had to do. And I don't believe that, but that is the idea that endured in Britain and America and most of Europe and most places, right? The war had, it was foisted on us by Hitler, and therefore, whatever you were, left, right, centre, you had to support the war, because otherwise, you're submitting to fascism. And just the great sort of scandal that historians have colluded in since then, which I think is just to disgrace, is that the threat of communism at that time has just more or less been ignored. No one talks about the communists having been a threat in 1939. It was like, I think you're supposed to think that however dangerous they were, Hitler was 100 times more dangerous. So just don't even bother talking about the communists. And I just think that is scandalous. Like, Hitler saw the danger of the communists, and what he was doing was all aimed at addressing that. And he hoped in vain that Britain, France, and America would more or less at least leave him to it, maybe even join him. And he was obviously completely wrong. And it was evident that it was wrong before that. I mean, the hostility towards Germany and America and increasingly in Britain should have been evident, but he probably overestimated himself. But I don't know if I'm answering your question here. Did you ask what was the argument overall of the series?
Yeah, so I guess what would you say? How would you say that it redirected us towards kind of the path that we're on right now?
By corrupting the right, by turning the right against the real right, by turning the pathetic, just power above everything right against the real right.
Okay.
Against identity, against race, against realism, biological realism, and so on as well.
Yeah,
So
I guess I have a somewhat different interpretation of it. Now, I'm admittedly not nearly as versed on World War II as you are. I did one course on it in university. I've read a couple books and done some of my own research. But I'd say that my real interpretation is that it's not really the war itself that is important today. It's the way that it's the way that it's been ingrained in the public consciousness. And I think and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that there is a certain group that's been very, very proactive at doing that. And I think there's no need to name them, but because I feel like 1945 was certainly a turning point. A lot of the criticisms I've made of liberalism and the Enlightenment, I think a lot of those were in place before World War II. I think that a lot of that had been going on. But World War II was certainly a turning point, though. And it's the origins of what we can call today anti-whiteism. It's the origins of the paradigm we are living under now. And my theory is, and I haven't really been able to find any clear documentation on this, but my theory is that there was a change of policy, maybe even as early as 1945. But there seemed to be this change of policy across the Western world that shifted us towards the Great Replacement. So it just seems like it wasn't one country, it wasn't one ideology, it wasn't one political party. It just seems like a full scale pivot in that direction. Like, for example, in Canada, the party that fought World War II was the Liberal Party, who are kind of our center left party. We have three parties, but one of them didn't. They existed, but there's two main ones. We have the Conservatives and the Liberals. And our Liberal Prime Minister at the time, he was not so this is where I may disagree. I think that even the left, the mainstream left, certainly not the far left, but the mainstream left prior to World War II was not anti-white. Our Prime Minister, William Lyon Mackenzie King, the longest serving Canadian Prime Minister, and he was the leader of the Liberal Party throughout World War II. He was he had said before and after the war that he was totally against any non-white immigration into Canada. It seems like there was a change of policy, and I think that a certain group which of course had a lot of institutional power before then, kind of shifted their focus from communism to a new project, what we might call globalism today. And this also might be where you and I may disagree, that I kind of view the threat that we have right now is not really communism, but something new entirely. So what we call it globalism, because it seems that faction, the one that's trying to undermine the West, really kind of abandoned, the USSR, the Eastern Bloc, worldwide revolution, overthrowing capitalism after the war, and shifted towards what we could call cultural Marxism today. So I'd say that there's just this major pivot that was made by a certain faction post World War II, and that's kind of what set us in motion towards what we're seeing right now. And they used kind of World War II as the foundation myth, and it is a myth because it's largely based on lies. But not that I'm denying that war crimes didn't take place. So my channel doesn't get. I'm not denying that war crimes didn't take place, but it's been created as this kind of liberal mythos that we're fighting against racism, and that certain war crimes that took place in that war were the gravest evil and kind of the ultimate condemnation of Western civilization, and why Europeans ever taking their own side and ever having in-group preference is akin to the war crimes that were committed during World War II. And this is how this kind of same narrative has been supplanted onto things like slavery, colonialism, segregation, and I feel like that's I kind of feel that's the main effect that World War II happened. What would you say about that interpretation? Would you agree with it? Disagree with it?
I totally agree. The reason that I've focused so much on the right And yeah, it is obviously it's never going to suffice if I only talk about Britain. So yeah, like we have to address why this pivot has occurred in pretty much nearly all the countries of the West, right? The reason I focused on the right is just why have they not fought it? Because I don't know if maybe to think of it in left-right terms is not quite sufficient, but you would think of the right as standing up against like anti-whiteness or anti-whiteism, anti-fascism. I agree that it's not, it's not that all these people are trying to use that to bring about communism.
It's just purely, and it should be called anti-whiteism, really. It's not really just anti-fascism.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, but why have the right adopted it as well? Like, why have the parties of the right adopted it in every country as well? That's the burning question for me, and that's what I'm always trying to sort of highlight and try to explain. I know I've only got part way, but it's what because like in Britain you have the Tory government. They fund Hope Not Hate, and David Cameron signed the founding statement of Unite Against Fascism. That's an extreme left group, an extreme left combined with Islamist group as well. But because it was automatic for a Tory by this time to be to support anything that was against fascism or racism, he signed it. It's that phenomenon that I just find so significant. Like, why is it that the whole spectrum, apart from what we call the dissident right, goes along with that originally extreme left ideology?
Well, I think there's two. I kind of have two answers to that. One would be that if you have to kind of understand the power dynamics that really exist in the West today. So, I mean, this would be another one of my critiques of the Enlightenment. It's that in democracy gives us what's the word? Consent of the governed. Consent of the governed, which John Locke talks about. His argument for democracy is that it's legitimate because people are consenting to those who rule over them. So they vote for a party, and then that party rules over them. They're consenting to that rule. Therefore, it's legitimate. But that really doesn't work at all, because it doesn't take into account how power dynamics really work. And this was what was so great about Mencius Moldbug's work about a decade ago when he described the cathedral. It's that the Western society is really more controlled by various institutions of strength, that being the academy, the media, the education. The education system, the media, corporations, entertainment, finance, and then elected politicians are only kind of one node to that. And what they've done for the last few decades is they've deliberately weeded out certain ideas and certain people who hold certain positions, and they've constructed it in a way to keep those positions out of the discourse. So, I mean, and you're totally seeing that right now. Like, they're going back and just punishing anyone who's ever been guilty of wrongthink in their life, and some who are even dead. But for instance, what happened in the universities is that the cultural Marxists, as we might call them, they once they got in, they showed in-group preference, and it's both ideological and ethnic in this case, that they would promote people who would advance the same agenda as them. Whereas the right was not really fighting that same battle. Like, this is what Joseph McCarthy tried to do, but was unfortunately stopped. And Joseph McCarthy did nothing wrong for this very reason. So they basically, and it's what's known as the Long March through the institutions. They basically worked to force right-wing ideas out of, first, the university, the media, and as it exists today, to really be part of a mainstream political party, you need to appease these certain interests. You need to give in to these positions of power, because the media will try to destroy you. You're not going to get the donations. You in some cases might even get a lawsuit levied against you by someone like the Anti-Defamation League. They have just all these nodes of power that are non-governmental in place to really just shape society in the direction that they wanted to. So, I think that's kind of why one reason that the right is not really the right anymore is because all the pressure groups, all these institutions are controlled by the left. And secondly, I'd say, why did they allow it to get that way? And I'd say the reason kind of goes back to my initial argument. What I said at the beginning was that I think that the problem is ultimately something that's spiritual, that, we can talk about how our societies are controlled by people who hate us, but how was it allowed to get there? And I think that I think what explains that for me is that basically it was not as strong spiritually as it would have been in the past, because there's been plenty of attempts to subvert Western civilization before by many different groups, including the one that we often like to discuss. But a lot of times, they would have viewed what those people were doing as something that was inherently evil, and it is something they would not have tolerated at all. But I guess it's kind of that lack of confidence and the lack of the lack of belief in their own civilization that allowed people to just kind of go along as something that's clearly hostile is just marching through your institution. So I'd say that's kind of my answer to that. I know it's kind of long-winded, but would you say that kind of the mainstream right, it's only really the only reason it even has power is because it gives into the various institutions that are already in place?
Yeah, I still think it begs the question though. Like, why has it not been a fight? Why has it just been a march? Why has it not been a counter march and a brawl?
Yeah, definitely.
Like what? I know you went somewhere to explain that with, in the sense that, well, I mean, would you say that the decline of Christianity cleared the way for this to happen?
Yeah, because it kind of it took away from a lot of the West's legitimization of its own existence. Like someone in a monarch in the 17th century would have believed that his rule was just and that he was doing God's work. But then, someone in the early 20th century didn't have that same civilizational confidence. So I think that that's kind of why there just wasn't as much of a fight really that was been put up. And I'd say that's kind of why it was so easy. You can look at another, the other thing is you can look at a country like Japan or South Korea today, and they basically don't have the same, they don't have the same problems with things like immigration or race. They are more or less homogenous societies, but they're very spiritually sick in the same way that the West is today. So, the average Japanese man today is a 35-year-old virgin living with his parents with a StarCraft and anime porn addiction. And I don't mean to say this. I don't mean this to be an insult to the Japanese. What I mean is it's really kind of sad the way that modernity has really scarred them the same way that it has in the West. And, one thing I wonder is, because a couple of weeks ago, they had Black Lives Matter protests in South Korea and Japan. Now, if that's not astroturfed, I don't know what is. Like, that's just about as genuine as a $3 bill. But I just wonder, will they actually be able to mount a resistance against that? And just looking at how kind of spiritually sick those countries are right now. And I don't mean that to be an insult towards them, but I think that it's the perfect conditions to subvert a society. It's by like breaking the will of the people, because I think this is also why there's just been such an attack on our culture, that by breaking that kind of the things that give people's lives meanings, it just opens you to destruction.
With all that you're describing, it does make me think of the Moldbug view. Do you know this guy Ralph Masilamani, who I've done a few live streams with? He goes under Right Reaction.
I've heard of him. Yes.
Yeah, he's like ethnic Indian or mixed, but mostly Indian. He's Christian too, and he very much advocates for seeing things in terms of the cathedral rather than what a lot of people on the right would sort of use as their explanations. Although, I mean, there's a great diversity actually of explanations on the right for why this is all happening. But he very much goes along with Moldbug's view in the cathedral. And when I think of, because I still struggle somewhat to fully grasp the idea of the cathedral and Moldbug's view in general. I mean, I understand the words he's saying. I still feel like there's something within it that I'm not quite grasping. But one thing that I imagined when you was talking the last few minutes was sort of, it's something like a wind, like the destructive sort of egalitarianism. I don't know if that's quite the right term. Equalitarianism of the last sort of, I don't know what period, maybe not just since the Second World War, maybe earlier, maybe quite a bit later. I don't know, but the force that has sort of laid waste to everything traditional or identitarian, and the same force that can even apply in Japan as here, that some people call globalization as well, globalism as well. I imagine it as some sort of wind that tears through a structure. The structure remains, but the people and the liveliness of it and the soulfulness of it is just torn away, and the structure is etiolated. So we still have, I don't know, our institutions, but they're occupied by people who place no value in where it all came from, or the continuity of the people that So when I say Britain, I mean primarily the people. I don't mean the nation state. And that applies to other things as well. I have come to think, I've gone through, as I said, many evolutions in thinking, but I've come to think in very strongly identitarian terms. I mean, it's possible to overstate it, but I think that inborn identity, it's hard to tell exactly how much of one's character is inborn or whatever, but a great deal can be changed by the course of your life, including, from zero to wherever you are now. But inborn identity is greatly important, and the ruling ideology of now is to deny all of that, to deny any importance to inborn differences and certainly to superiorities. And I think of when people describe the cathedral idea to me, I think of it as just sort of an impersonal development that no one person or organization could ever have withstood. I guess maybe why I shrink away from that vision is that it's rather hopeless. I mean, how does one fight a hurricane? If I'm right in describing it that way, how do you fight? I mean, I'm straying from whether it's correct or not to understand it in this way. I'm laying my own wishes over it, I guess. But do you know what I mean? Like, how do you fight something totally that's just a force of positions rather than people?
Yeah. So, to describe what the cathedral means in a nutshell, it's basically the intelligentsia. So it's the worldview held by those in the institutions of power. So, the ideology that's advanced by the universities, the media, and held by those high up in corporations and in banks and such. When Moldbug wrote this, I think that one thing is, first of all, you also have to understand that he is, so to say, not of the West. So that is something that is worth noting.
Yeah.
When he wrote it, it was not as clear because he wrote this back in 2008. But I think that certainly within the last 5 years, and I think this year it's just played in the open, you kind of see it coming into light. And I'd say that it's best described as the phenomenon of woke capital. I'd say that really is the real life incarnation of the cathedral. It's the societal project of globalism, and this is actually what I'm doing my next video on. And in terms of the force that that you mentioned that kind of goes through societies like a hurricane, I'd say that a lot of that is modernity, really. That we're not really even evolutionarily adapt to actually live in a society that's so materially wealthy. It's something that the post-industrial revolution world, and especially within the last few decades, is something that's so alien to the natural human condition that it has been able to like eat away a lot of just kind of everything, every kind of spirituality that anyone has ever had across the world. You just need to give them enough iPhones, Burger Kings, and an LGBT pride parade or something like that. And what I'd say is that the way that you have to resist that is that there kind of needs to be an understanding of how of a way to actually live in modernity. My friend the distributor said that, and this is something I largely agree with. What he said is that he doesn't see right-wing ideas as a means of restoring a previous human state. He sees it as a way of creating a new future for humanity, as opposed to the one that we're really staring down. So, I'd say that really kind of the way out of it is that there needs to be a new understanding of how we're going to live in this century. I think that and that has to take into account a lot of the various ideas we discuss online, like nationalism and identity and things like that. I think that for example, one concept that I advance a lot, and I think really needs to become one of the main talking points of the right, is the idea of loyalty. So, I don't think it's enough to have an elected leader. You need a leader that is loyal to you and to your group, and a leader that has skin in the game. So one who will face consequences if they are wrong. And I think that our enemies definitely understand that, because first of all, you can look at the incentive structure. Like you mentioned, how these Tory politicians couldn't care less about the destruction of their society. It's because they really have nothing to lose. Like, what does you could look at all these politicians for the last few decades in all these Western countries. What did they really lose for creating the disaster that we have on our hands right now? They didn't lose anything. They just had their 10, 15-year political career, got a huge pension, and they're just living out in their gated communities now, having retired and having just lined their pockets throughout their careers. So there's no skin. Well, the phrase that I believe it was Nassim Nicholas Taleb that used it was skin in the game. That the leaders need to have something. They need to have something to lose. And then secondly, loyalty. They need to be loyal to the people that they're governing. And I think that when you look at things like affirmative action, I think that the main purpose of that is to remove white people from institutions of power, so that those that are running Western civilization are not loyal to our people. They're loyal to they're loyal to the project of globalization, or in some cases they're loyal to a different group. And what you also see is that there's this brilliant paper that Sean Lasts shared it a while back, and I think that Morgoth had shared it too. It's looking at how many American elites are of a certain ethno-religious background, and there's a huge number, and they definitely have this in-group preference to promote themselves to higher levels of society, because they want that society to be loyal to them and against the interests of the people of the West. So I'd say that there needs to be there does need to be a new understanding of how to live in modernity, really. And I'd say that that's kind of what the right really needs to offer, in my opinion, because when you look at the leftists, I mean, what is the leftist real critique of modern society? It's just that certain people don't have enough material wealth. Certain people don't, black people don't make as much money per year as white people. They don't have enough money to spend on Air Jordans or something like that. It's really shallow. And I'd say that that would be, the right needs kind of a culmination of all of that to really kind of mount a real opposition to the paradigm we're under.
I mean, so in terms of, like, say, you referred to like Tory politicians just quite blatantly betraying their own people for decades and then retiring and living comfortably and then dying, and it just doesn't matter to them because they've got no skin in the game. Is that an expression of the functioning of the cathedral?
As in that they don't have any skin in the game?
Yeah, and as in they see it as their job to just serve the ruling ideology, or just to be part of the ruling class and not to have any regard for those below.
Well, the function is that the incentive structure is really set up that it's much more viable for them to just give in to the zeitgeist and betray the things that they ought to really be loyal to, because the entire incentive structure is to just give into that. I mean, you can look at someone like Enoch Powell. I mean, he's someone that you could argue genuinely cared about his society, and he was just destroyed because he took the path of most resistance rather than the path of least resistance. Whereas the path of least resistance is just go along with it, really. And I'd say that that's one of the major problems we have, is that the elites today don't have any skin in they don't have any skin in the game, and they don't have any loyalty. And I think that's really what people need to demand, is those two factors about the people that are going to be governing us.
All of this does make a great deal of sense, and it does, I think, serve as sort of 80% of the explanation we need. But several things I've been thinking about recently complicate the picture. And one is that I'm reading this book, The Controversy of Zion. Have you ever read this?
No, I haven't.
Have you heard of it?
Who's it by?
Douglas Reid. He was a British journalist for the Times in the first half of the 20th century. I think he died in like the late 60s. To describe it in detail, I'm only a third of the way through it anyway, but I don't want to like break all the YouTube rules, but you can imagine what it's about given the title and given my reticence in talking about it. He talks about shadow government, and it's a really fascinating book. That angle, that occurred to me because, especially when you mentioned Enoch Powell, this is something that I've wondered about many times. Why was it that Edward Heath, obviously a Tory leader, not only disagreed with Powell but fired him immediately from his shadow cabinet? And the polls that were taken in regards to what Enoch Powell had said in that speech showed that the very lowest, poll result of the number of people supporting him was 2/3 of the country supported Powell. And Edward Heath obviously chose to shun that. Like, he could have made himself immensely popular by allying with Powell, and he chose the exact opposite. That to me suggests, I mean, is the cathedral supposed to have been fully functioning by that point, like the late 60s? Because otherwise, I think the more likely thing is that Heath was actually being blackmailed. And I know this, I'm only talking about one incident, whereas we're talking about grander themes. But I think there are many such incidents as well.
Well, I guess my explanation for that would be kind of that I believe that there was that kind of pivot. There was that shift in policy that took place sometime between, if not exactly in 1945, someplace time between that and 1960. Because one thing that really crossed my mind, even before I was even like a nationalist, or even before I was a reactionary right winger or something like that, when I was kind of just getting interested in politics, like this crossed my mind back when I was in high school, is that it seemed like there was just this there was just kind of this flip of the switch, and I always just wondered, were this many people convinced of anti-racism by Martin Luther King's speech? And I something I couldn't understand, because if you look at the timeline between 1965 and 1970. Canada, the U.S., and Australia all had previously had European-only immigration policies, and in that 5-year window, all of them switched that policy. And Enoch Powell, within that period in 1968, was had his career ruined for opposing a similar policy in Britain. And then only a couple years later, actually in 1965 as well, Rhodesia was basically sanctioned and blackmailed by the rest of the world for trying to maintain white minority rule. And only a couple years later, the same thing happened to South Africa. So it was almost as if, like, what would be, I mean, today what would be called white nationalism, but that back then was just the human norm, that being like white people's right to self-determination. That went from being the policy of all these Western countries to just being not only not the policy, but almost illegal to advocate for within a very short window of time. So my opinion is that the cathedral was already very much in power then, because there had to have been just a policy that there had to have been this agenda that was already in place, because that didn't only happen in one country, that happened in multiple countries at the exact same time. And like what stuck in my mind is like, did they really convince every white person on earth that racism was bad that quickly? And the answer is no, they didn't. The truth is that they changed a policy of some kind. Now, I haven't found any documents or any like material proof that that was the case, but that was something that stuck in my mind. And I think that must have been the case. I can't think of any other explanation for it.
And obviously you're implying there that was something that took hold across all the English-speaking countries as well.
Yes, I do believe so.
Yeah, which is, I don't know, it implies coordination.
Yeah, and the other thing is that they also implemented things that would not only the immigration policies, but also what would be considered, it's called quote unquote civil rights laws, but what it really is it denies white people the right to self-determination. So basically forced association laws. So like the end of what was called segregation in the United States. They implemented a lot of those over that short period of time. I believe that Britain and Canada in that same window actually enacted those same policies. So there must have, by then there had to have been a policy in place, in my opinion, that was designed to bring about the Great Replacement, really. I think that it was decided upon.
Another thing that would support what you're saying there is the forming of the Institute of Race Relations and the Runnymede Trust in Britain also happened in the late 60s. And those two organisations, especially the Runnymede Trust, have done so much to destroy us. So it's a deeply sinister and evil organisation. I've also read on Occidental Observer the way that quote race relations unquote has been imposed on Australia as well. I think that a lot of that took hold in the late 60s. It's amazing. Like we are to me, this does cry conspiracy. It does cry conscious coordination rather than systemic developments. Like or just it does. I do think it's been driven by. I lean that way anyway. Like a conscious international conspiracy. I think this is. I mean, I'm saying that in contradiction to the idea of the cathedral because I always think of the cathedral as sort of a thing that doesn't reside in one person, right? That you can't blame one personal group. Right?
And that would be something I would disagree with Moldbug on. He seemed to think of it as kind of like this mind virus that was like acting kind of as a force of its own. And I think it's a lot more concrete than he says it is. So, I mean, he's certainly right about how he describes how power works. But I definitely think that it is a lot more deliberate and a lot more concrete than he outlined it when he wrote his essay about 12 years ago. And the other thing that was kind of on my mind earlier last year was that that the people that implemented it must have been thinking beyond their own lifetimes, because someone that made that policy is obviously dead now. And if it was just about money, then why would they care? Why would they care about making money for in several decades when they'd already be dead? So they had to have had some kind of, at least my interpretation is they must have had some kind of interest that extended beyond their own lifetime. They had to have some kind of interest beyond just the material. So I think that also sheds a lot of light on why certain groups may have been involved in that stuff back then and are largely involved in it today, because it's kind of serving another group's interest.
Is it a stretch to suggest that Moldbug is actually, playing his part in the tribal project to head us off, to sort of divert us by making us think that it's not consciously driven, like to get us interested by describing the phenomena quite accurately and astutely, but to divert us into thinking that it's not being done malevolently and therefore neuter our resistance to it? I mean, it's possible.
I'm not going to lie; it's crossed my mind. I don't think that was his intention when he wrote it, but
yeah, it might be subliminal on his part. I mean, I was listening to the Strike and Mike a few weeks ago, and they suggested exactly that. I think, well, they implied that. I don't think they said it straight out, but that seemed to be implied by what they said. They were discussing him, and they said, yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, he gets. I mean, well, the best way to lie to people, maybe I'm being really unfair to the guy, but the best way to lie to people is to smuggle it in amongst a lot of truth, right? The best way to deceive people is to serve them lies inside a pie of truth, So, no, I mean, this is not really the point of what we're talking about, I know, but well, maybe it is, but this is something that I did think of before we. Sorry, was it? Were you about to say something before I go?
Oh no, go ahead.
I mean, Keith Woods has used the phrase "racist libertarians" quite a lot. Racist liberals quite a lot. I think he's not the only one as well. And some people find this really insulting or needlessly disparaging. I think it's a very interesting thing to grapple with, because he's saying, in order to achieve whatever it is we on the right are trying to achieve, you can't just carry on as you are but add racism or racialism. You've got to become wholly, I guess he would say, a fascist, or you've got to become wholly, profoundly right wing, like throughout your thinking. And whereas I depart from this, I think I actually am sort of what he's describing, but quite consciously so. It's not that I haven't thought about, third positionism and stuff. It's just that I don't fully embrace it. I do agree with it to some extent, but I'm still, as I said earlier, still somewhat in the liberal camp in certain ways. But when it comes to these questions of why is this all happening, I think it sort of adds emphasis to the racist part of that formation, because but not in a way that I condemn myself for, but it's like I am putting things more down to racial motivations, as I suggested in at least the first few videos on my channel, including that one, Death by Community Self-Defense. Because my emphasis in that was that don't just think of Antifa as you rightly said, it's not just communism, and it's not just about racism. It's about the power of that other tribe over us, and Antifa acts as an instrument of their power, among many other things. It also acts for what we could say the cathedral and woke capital, certainly, and BLM and and right-wing parties even as well. And Antifa serves all sorts of functions. It terrorizes the enemies of the system in almost every sense. But in the same way that I emphasise the tribe's involvement in Antifa, they loom larger in my thinking the more I talk about it. Just over the last hour and a half that we've been talking about this, they loom even larger than before. That tribe, like that. I actually, I'm not thinking of Moldbug here. I'm thinking of just everyone in terms of the systemic explanations for things rather than personal malevolence. I think I lean more strongly, even than just an hour ago, towards the malevolence side and the idea of an evil cabal. I don't. Tell me if you think that's childish. I find myself going more that way.
Yeah, I mean, there was the ADL has listed anti-fascism, and being against Antifa is a hate symbol now. I mean, so the Antifa flag with the line through it is now a hate symbol according to the ADL.
I mean, yeah, they've become farcical. I mean, there's no sign yet of their power and influence waning. I mean, sometimes it's a thing, in recent months, maybe years, for people in our side of things to congratulate ourselves, to sort of encourage ourselves or hearten ourselves by saying, oh, they're overreaching, they're going too far. There's no sign yet that they've gone too far. It just appears absurd to us the way they're behaving. Things like that, right? Making everything a symbol of white supremacy or a hate symbol, yeah. But sorry, I think I interrupted you there. Sorry.
Well, what I think is that I try to look at it from the two perspectives. There's the Spenglerian one, or the John Bagot Glubb one, the one that Western civilization has kind of lost its spark, and then there's also the subversion aspect that, there actually is a deliberate attempt to subvert and destroy the West. And I buy into both of them to a certain extent. I'd say, though, that
would Spengler say that it would be a mistake to place too much emphasis on external forces? Would he say that it's our problem anyway, regardless of what they've done?
To be honest, I haven't gotten around to reading it yet, but I think that he did actually condemn, because like he lived in Germany in the 1930s. He died in 1936. He was not actually entirely on board with the National Socialists' diagnosis of what was wrong with the country at the time. So he probably would condemn chalking it all up to that one factor, because I do too. I am not 100% that it's all just this international cabal that's behind it, because because then there's the fact of the matter that we're not actually resisting it in any real way. But I'd say that how do you answer it is that I guess the question is how, you have to think about ways to get out of it. And I think that it's definitely better to realize that when you realize that it's not exactly it's not exactly that someone controls the entire world and everything they do or is it anything that you do is just going to be futile. I certainly don't think that's both accurate or the correct way to go about it. And I think it's also important to say that to look at how we can improve ourselves. So what really needs to happen to mount a counteroffensive against it. And I'd say what my solution would be when I spoke with Devin Stack of Black Pilled, he said something that I really agreed with, is that for us to win, right-wing ideas need to take on a religiosity the same way that left-wing ideas do. So basically, we need our people to just not care the same way that the Islamist does not care if you tell him his religion is wrong. He believes that he is on the absolute side of good. Now, I'm not a Muslim. I certainly don't agree that he is, but that kind of self-confidence and belief that's what makes that's what makes Islam like a much more powerful civilizational force than what we have now. And how the leftist just doesn't care about facts. They are thinking about this religiously. I think right-wing ideas need to take on that same kind of religiosity in order to actually mount a real to actually mount resistance against it. And I myself, I am a Christian, but I realize that not everyone is going to convert to Christianity. I know that a lot of people either don't believe it's true or they just can't think that way. And that's totally something that I think that's something that is totally fine, because I think that a lot of us can get behind both the idea of being pro-European, being pro-Western civilization, and holding that as the ultimate good that we want to advance towards. And then secondly, being in favor of order. So wanting a stable and healthy society. So one that we don't have things like transgender drag queen story hour, ones where we don't have, people, people considering abortion to be like this liberation, and, celebrating outside of abortion clinics and getting tattoos and stuff like that, or destroying historical sites and seeing that as something that's just. I'd say that that's the two kind of ideas that the right can really rally around spiritually. Would be first of all being pro-Western civilization, being pro-European identity, and secondly being pro-order, being pro-order, and being in favor of a civilization that's more stable than the one we live in. So, what would you say would be like kind of the way out of it?
Well, I have if you wouldn't mind, I'll ask you a question about what you said. Yeah, I have no doubt that would make us stronger. But can that be willed? Can that be chosen?
I'm glad you actually asked that, because it's something I wanted to add on, is that I don't think it can be faked. So no, it's not you can't fake that. So you can't just say, I am super proud of who I am. It's so important to me. Because, you know, like that's what someone like Black Lives Matter does. Like it's basically just a cult that just tells them they're awesome because they're black and all their problems in the world are because of white people. And it's just something that's totally fake. You know, it needs to actually be something that that comes about organically. And I think that things like culture and community and all these things are the way that you'd actually be able to create something like that. That it needs to come about. It needs to come about naturally, because, you know, you can't just like tweet, you know, the 14 words on Twitter. That's not actually changing anything. It needs to be something that's real and not just forced. So that's why I say the cultural battle is one that's so important for us.
It definitely is. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that it's funny. It's funny to think, because it's something that one sort of, being in the sort of rationalist melee, one can sort of deplore, yet realize that it is an advantage. That when you see, like, I mean, I've always thought that Marxism, but yeah, probably leftism more broadly, just functions like a religion and is stronger for that. And obviously, as you said, Islam as well. I mean, in Islam, I was going to ask you, I mean, because they don't, I don't think they're necessarily concerned with good and evil. It's just God commands this, and therefore you either must do this or you at least have license to do this. You know, generally conquest and subjection of the unbelievers. I mean, I think Christianity is a little bit more interesting, a little bit more complicated than that. I think, I don't know, Judaism, I think, well, Talmudic Judaism, it seemed to be strictly about law. Like the Talmud, I think, laid down a legal code, and it's just the book I'm reading at the moment said that served mainly to control the rest of their tribe. It wasn't actually even meant to be read by anyone else, but the Talmud served to strictly establish total control of the tribe by its few leaders, like the leading rabbinate or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I probably have less understanding of Christianity in a way, but I do. It totally, like, if someone says to me, right, what you've got a few choices, well, so let's say two choices. You can either stay sort of more or less atheist. I guess I don't know if that's exactly the right term for what I am, but you can stay more or less that, but you're going to lose, or you can become a Christian and your race is going to revive. I'm obviously going to go for the second one. It still begs the question of what does it mean to become a Christian if that faith doesn't come to me spontaneously? You know what I mean? On the other end, I am in a slightly complicated position because the first time, as far as I know in my life, as far as I can remember, I did say a prayer, just in my mind, not aloud, but it was answered immediately earlier this year. And that one instance I've not forgotten. And I thought maybe I'm on that path now. So I don't really know, but I felt like the idea of the saviour has begun to matter in my thinking, whereas it didn't before. So maybe that puts me in a good position to sort of, I've got a foot in both. I don't know if this makes any sense, but I've got a foot in both camps. Maybe I can sort of help others, you know, each side understand the other, the Christians and the non-Christians, or the I don't know, the religious and the non-religious. Because religion was, until not that long ago for me, something of a dirty word. I just thought of it as kind of irrationality and stupidity. And I mean, there's things that strongly put me off about Christianity, like the Trinity, or the papacy. Not that that's essential to it, but the Trinity in particular. I'm like, what on earth are you talking about? Like, what the? But that I mean, maybe that's not an essential idea in Christianity. On the other hand, I do like the idea of the sins and the virtues. I mean, you mentioned BLM, the sort of tawdriness of BLM, like pride. Well, and obviously gay pride and trans pride and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Pride is, like, I agree with Christians that pride is a sin. You know, and like you're inverting the idea of morality there. You're proudly adopting sin, and that's like a ruling ideology. That's a disastrous thing. That's satanic. So, sorry, you were going to say something.
Well, yeah, like what I said is that I think that you can't you can't force religiosity. You can't force belief in a religion. Just like you can't force pride. You can't force confidence. Like just like you can't somebody who has read a bunch of Tony Robbins books and walks into a boardroom to give a presentation. They can tell themselves they're as confident as they want, but it really shows when you're actually up there giving that presentation. And kind of like I mentioned, like Black Lives Matter or LGBT pride, it's just completely fake. Like it's fake identitarianism or something like that. It's fake. I don't want to use the word pride because it's a dirty. It's kind of like a contaminated word. It's totally like a stand-in. So like when you look at things like ethnic loyalty and identity and stuff like that, it comes with duty. It means that not only do you identify as that, but you actually are responsible to that. So you actually need to give up things in order to actually in order to actually serve this thing. So when you're part of that, when you see yourself as a part of a collective, it's not about just saying I'm white or I'm a European or I'm a Canadian or a British person or whatever, and I'm awesome because of that. It's that you actually need to there's actually things that you need to do. You have to actually live towards that. You actually have to give things up. Whereas like when you look at the left, it's just like them saying, I'm awesome because of this and just give me free shit. So, I definitely think that that these are a lot of things that the right needs to actually start looking into a lot more seriously to actually to actually be able to create something, to be able to actually create a political force that's actually able to, but both political and cultural, that's actually able to withstand the kind of tide that we're on right now. And I don't think it's impossible because for a few reasons. One is that the order that we're up against is just based on lies. So what will win out is it's basically a battle right now between institutionally backed and financially backed lies versus the truth. And I hope that I hope that in the end the truth ends up winning out. And I'd say that that's what we have on our side though. So
and obviously the last question you put to me was that was in order that we can not only hope but try and do what we can to make it happen, right? It made me think just what you said there. Like, do you? I mean, in order for the right or whatever to prosper, the truth-based movement. That's a bit self-aggrandizing, but the truer, the more good, the side more concerned with good and right, and virtue and reality. Would you say that we would benefit from being more philosophical? Would you say? I don't. When I was thinking of that, I was thinking like philosophy as related to religion, even like philosophy in terms of clearing away bad ideas and illusions.
I mean, I don't want it to just. I mean, I don't want to say that like the right needs to be like super complex because at the end of the day, you do kind of need simple messages which appeal to the average person because the average white person is not going to have read like all these books and stuff like that. Who's not going to have read every book by Aristotle and Plato and Heidegger and people like that. But I do think that basically there needs to be like a different vision for there definitely needs to be a different vision put forth because right now what you have the competing ones is that there's the mainstream right which says that we have plenty of material goods, we have plenty of iPhones and Big Macs, and we just need more of them. And the left saying, well, we just don't have, certain, black people don't have enough of them, or gay people don't have enough, and we just need more. I'd say that what it really needs is just a broader critique of that entire worldview to actually like mount a real opposition to it. But anyway, we've been going on for quite a while. Is there anything left you'd like to say, Horus, before we finish?
No, I mean, I'm sure I'll have loads more thoughts about this afterwards when I think about it more. I don't feel like I'm at my most articulate today as well. So I hope it's not been. I hope it's been good for the audience and stuff.
Oh, it has been. I've enjoyed this one.
Yeah, there's so because obviously what we're grappling with really is how to like save the world and stuff. So it's like not always easy to come to clean conclusions.
I'm not, yeah, I'm not gonna. I'm not under any. I'm not under any illusions that I'm saving the world. It just God, it's a no. I mean, I'm just one person trying to figure out modernity, really, and do it and do what I can.
Well, even that is a huge thing to confront, isn't it? I don't think I have anything particular to add. I obviously thank people for listening in. I haven't looked at the chat at all, but I always, it's always nice knowing that people are interested. And well, thanks for having me on your channel, and I'll put this up on my BitChute as well. And,
all right. Well, yeah, this has been a good one. So subscribe to Horus on BitChute because he's been banned from YouTube. Unfortunately, he makes some great content, great historical content. And he really breaks down really the ins and outs of the kind of power structures that exist today. And he did this. I think my favorite video he's made is the Against Brian and Avi video. That was the first video. That one was great. It's just going over all these dismantling the anti-jihad movement. But all right, so thanks to everyone for listening, and I will speak to you later. I have a video. I know it's been a while since my last video, but I'm just about finished writing it, and it should be out hopefully in a week or so. So talk to y'all later.